Hello and welcome to Drinking from the Fire Hose. So this is the full-length version of the next in our series of videos. So my name is Murray McMillan and I'm co-presenting, as always, with Roger Wilcox, who you'll meet in a few minutes. So this week we're focusing on maximising production. And as you know, as always, I guess most of our stories and our anecdotes will be from oil and gas. But it's probably more important in this one that this covers every industry. So whether it's manufacturing or service industries, anywhere you're trying to maximize performance, the same key approach, the same key facets will work for you as well. So forgive the oil and gas stories again. Roger and I do have plenty of experience of other industries. Just these tend to be the stories that come up in the videos. So for this one, starting off as always, what's the goal? And for me, the goal in this is very clear. The goal is about getting everybody engaged in driving performance. And in this case, chasing barrels. I've been lucky enough to work in a few organizations where we've been very successful with this. We've established a very powerful and effective culture of chasing every barrel. So literally every barrel counts. And to do that and to do it effectively, you need everybody engaged. So you need maintenance and operations and finance and wells, reservoir, everybody involved, everybody working from the same sheet. Sounds obvious, but it's amazing how many times that doesn't happen. I've been in plenty of organizations where they're so focused on their part of the machine, they forget the bigger picture. And for a lot of organizations, we're a production company. That's what we get paid for. It's what we get rewarded for. So chasing those barrels is extremely powerful and extremely important, actually. Some of the benefits of the whys we do this, obviously, maximizing revenue. We get paid for barrels or gas or whatever as we do. So it's keeping the focus on that and actually making sure everybody understands that. One of I think probably the most effective things we did in a recent project I was involved in, we get really closely tied in with the finance teams and the marketing teams. And it was then important to see that for all we were making a promise to deliver X number of barrels, how does that fit into the big picture? Yeah. Are we making a profit? Are we not making a profit? Are these loads being sold further down the line, the tanker loads to vendors? That's all very important. And it's sometimes easy to forget when you're at the front end that, hey, we've had a trip, it's not that big a deal. Actually, it's a really big deal because we've promised that product to people who've actually probably already bought it. They're waiting for their tanker load to come. And that money's also been earmarked for something else, whether it be for drilling or more development or whatever we're doing as an organization. So actually, these things are very important, and having that sight of the bigger picture is really key. The other benefit in there is making sure production is optimized at all times. You would assume it is, but again, it's not always the case. So just finger on the pulse. Are we chasing every barrel every day? And I'm going to refer to one of Roger's stories from a previous version of the video we did. I think it was on Vision. And it's about, making sure that everybody's doing that. And he had a really good story from a well site where he did out with an operator, and this guy was just tweaking and trying to ease out another few barrels every day. And I forget the exact amount, Roger, but I think it was something about 10 barrels. So let's say this guy won an extra 10 barrels a day. Doesn't sound like a lot, but 10 barrels every day over the course of the year, even at current oil prices, is about, well, it's north of $150,000. So just 10 barrels a day, that's worth an awful lot of money. Had that been 100 barrels of oil a day, you're about $1.5 million. So it very quickly mounts up if you're doing it all the time. So just fully optimized all the time. And I've used that with a lot of clients where they maybe feel they're pushing production as hard as they can, but when you talk to the guys at the front line, do you have any way at all, any ideas how we could eke out another 10 barrels? They always do. Yeah. If you were looking for thousands, it's more of a challenge, but just 10 barrels, everybody's got a better way of doing it. Whether it's bringing on a well in a different way or running well tests differently, challenging how we've always done things. So many times you hear, but we always do it that way. That's what's in the guides or the procedure. Yeah. Okay, but is it still relevant? Could we challenge that? Could we change the time a little bit? So optimized all the time, maximizing your revenues, obviously, and reducing those unplanned losses. A fairly obvious one, if we can stop the unplanned losses coming through so often, because you've got a whole bunch of hidden costs in there as well. You've got people's time, you've got spare parts, you've got logistics, you've got all sorts of things that impact the business, perhaps in a hidden way. And just my final bit on the unplanned losses before I hand over to Roger. There's other little key bits in there. For example, startups. If as you start the plant back up, if you've had an unplanned loss, being able to reduce that startup time is probably one of the biggest victories I've had in previous projects. If you've normally got a 6-hour startup, if you can make that 5 hours, fantastic. It's always a way, can we make it shorter and more effective? Get the place back up and running, back up to full production. So focusing on some of these hidden things is also key. Roger, over to you for a few more.
Yeah, thanks very much, Murray. Yeah, it was interesting, that one where the operator had identified a way of saving 10 barrels a day. And what actually happened in that case, and tell it in the other story, is he identified that. We talked about it at the team meeting, and the next day other people came up with improvements as well that they could do. So even that 10 barrels multiplied out from there. So, and it's staggering, when you take that sums and turn it into financials, how much of an impact it has. I think sometimes we get a bit blasé that we're producing, 40 MBD or 100 MBD or whatever it is. And just a little bit makes a huge difference in terms of revenue. And that's ultimately what we're after, is revenue. Now, some of the other things though is carbon emissions is a big thing at the moment. And there's a lot of conversations, a lot of companies that are setting very clearly what their targets are. And I was quite interested to see Serica Energy, who one of the new operators to the North Sea, in their 2019 annual results, they were actually talking about how they reduce down carbon emissions. So part of this is thinking about, how do you maximize your production, but at the same time, how can you do things smarter? And in a startup instance in 2018, they were saying that they flared 2,000 tons of gas. They got it down to, in 2020, 970 tons. So that was an overall reduction of 48%. And that has a big impact in terms of carbon dioxide. So the equivalent carbon dioxide saving was about 2,500 tons. And that's by doing things differently, thinking differently. But if you think the tools we're about to show you at the moment on how to achieve this, if you apply some of these, you not only improve production, but you can also significantly reduce your carbon emissions. I think the other benefit of this, focusing on maximizing production, is it is engaging. It's engaging on the teams. Sometimes productions become a bad word, and we want to focus on that and ensure that people understand the value of production. There's clearly focus on personnel safety, on safety performance, etc. So we're not saying don't focus on that, but I think there's a value to be focused on doing what we do well and really focusing on the barrel. One of the things we're going to do now is look at our current performance and ask the question, how do you assess your current performance? How good are you in this area? And then we're going to go on to talk about how to achieve the goals. And we've got a number of things there we're going to talk through. So the first thing you can do, especially managers and leaders, is go and see how visible is your current performance. Is it clear to the offshore teams, to the onshore teams, what your production is? Is it clear to the commercial teams, the HR teams? Is it clear to your supply chain? What's the production performance? What are you generating? Is that clear in terms of revenue? So you're not just focused on the barrel, you're actually focused on your top line figures as well. And ultimately what that does for your bottom line. The question a leader can ask is, how can you assure yourself that everybody knows the role that they play in delivering that target? How are you communicating your losses, your unplanned losses, your planned losses, but how are you communicating that? Are they clear? And one of the things that's really important for Murray and I is, how are you engaging people? So how engaged are your frontline teams in production? Are they thinking about problem solving and what problems they have? Are they thinking about optimization, continuously improving their production uptime? So how engaged are the teams in reality? And I think another one is, how is performance rewarded as well? So think about that. What are you doing to motivate your teams, both in terms of tangibles and intangibles, to reward them? So over to Murray to talk through some of the ways we can tangibly make a difference here. How are we going to do this?
Okay, thanks, Roger. I'm actually just going to add a couple of little points, because I've got a couple of little anecdotes from the section you just went through there. I think, so one of the questions you asked there about how engaged are people, how much do they know about our current performance? There's a very easy action in there. Go ask a few people, what did we produce yesterday? Or what did we produce last week? Don't go and ask the ops team, because they ought to know. Go and, well, actually, maybe do ask them, because they definitely should know. But go and ask a few others as well. I've found this in so many organizations, because you'll be surprised at how many people don't know and probably don't even get close. But if they do say, for example, we produced 30,000 barrels yesterday, If the target was 31, that's fantastic, but a good day. If the target was 60, it wasn't such a good day. So yeah, do they know what we produced? But actually, do they know how good or how bad that was? And why was it good or bad? So it's an easy thing to do. Just ask a few people in a mix of teams to see how well that gets across. A couple of other things we've done in the past on sort of visualizing the performance, especially around unplanned losses. And I've done this with a few operators over the years. I'll not name them, but you can probably guess in Aberdeen, great big atrium in their head offices up there. One of the things we did to kind of bring this to life was, using unplanned losses, the barrels of oil. How often would we fill this atrium? And the nice thing is it made it real, because people have in the past have done how many swimming pools, how many Wembley stadiums, doesn't mean an awful lot. But when you walk into your atrium every day and you think, crikey, we fill this every 2 days with unplanned losses, that sticks in your head. That becomes a very powerful message that we need to improve that somehow. The other thing to do is Roger said.
Let me just build on that, if you don't mind. Sorry for the interruption, but one of the things I've seen along those lines that works really well as well. It was one operator I worked with, and I was speaking to the manager of that operation, and what he wanted to do is really visibly show people what they were doing. And so what he talked about, very similar to that about the atrium, but what he wanted a gas cooker. So they were producing gas, and he wanted a gas cooker in the office. And what he wanted to do was every day change the flame size on the cooker, so that if they had a poor performing day, it was this big. If they had a great day and they produced a lot, it was this big. Now, in the end, they didn't get a cooker into the office, but what they did do was they took the concept and they had pictures up, and they actually had like a picture of the flame, the flame size. And so everybody every day could walk in visually and actually see how big the flame was and know how much production they were generating in terms of gas. So sorry, back to you, Murray.
No, it's a brilliant example, Roger. And I think it almost doesn't matter what you do, but you could then imagine people walking into that office and thinking, why have we got an image of a flame up on the wall? Starts the conversation, starts people talking about performance in production. And I think it doesn't matter how you do it, so long as you get more people aware of it and talking about it. And my only final sort of part to that is making it simple. I think you mentioned, Roger, that we get a bit blasé about barrels. Sometimes it's hard to visualize when it's big numbers. Scuffs of gas are even harder for me. Turning it into dollars is an easy way to do it. And again, we've used this with an operator in the past where, especially if it's tied into losses, if you turn that into actual dollar value on a weekly basis, people will be staggered about how much we don't produce. Yeah. There's an argument whether it's lost or not, is it lost or deferred, but essentially you did promise to produce it that day and you didn't. So that is a chunk of value that now the rest of the business doesn't have to use as they had planned to, as they had forecast to. So yeah, being able to visualize it, however you do that, I think is really important. Engage everybody in the organization around how we're doing. Are we doing well or doing badly? So moving on, no more stories for a minute. Moving on to how to achieve that. One we've mentioned, I think, in every video is go see and assess. So go and check these things, go and ask for them, go and have a look around. Is the information there? Some of the specifics, though, we're probably going to mix up technical and behavioural here, but some of the specific technical stuff we've got, for example, are your maximum capacity charts. So again, in production environments, pretty key, usually spread across the 4 chokes, so reservoir, wells, plant, and export. You ought to have fairly accurate capacities, current capacities for these. Yeah. So that's maybe one of the first things. Have we got it? Number 2, is it still relevant? When did we last update it? And it's because that, for me, around the whole loss management stuff, which is a real passion for me, that is absolutely fundamental for you being able to come up with a realistic target. We give that different names in different organizations, but essentially, what's the realistic target we're aiming for each day? And it has to be believable. If you come up with a target that feels like it's way out of reach, people will struggle to get engaged. So I always like to engage the offshore teams in this as well. It should be a discussion about what our target is rather than a pure calculation. Yeah. So having these capacity charts is really key. And again, it's something we can help you with. If you don't have them or you don't think they're as good as they could be, again, talk to us. We've got plenty of good examples. Tied into that, and it probably feeds into almost debottlenecking, because again, in the life of an asset, all these things change. Reservoir, wells change. The plant is fairly static, but where it's maybe at capacity at the start, it's maybe oversized now. So what sort of things can we do to make it more efficient with lower volumes coming through in later life? And another sort of approach that can be very powerful for that is production technical limits is fairly common across most operators. There's different ways to do it, but essentially bringing together a lot of the technical teams just to share that understanding. And it's amazing. I've been involved in many of these over the years, and it's always amazing how it's a real lights on moment for certain teams. When you've got somebody from the reservoir side, which is almost feels like black magic anyway, if somebody from the reservoir side is explaining reservoir performance and why it is the way it is, you almost certainly have people from other parts of the organization absolutely blown away with this information. Now, it's there every day, but they just haven't dug into it, or nobody feels like they've shared it. And that's the same with the wells guys, the plant guys, the export guys. Having everybody together, whether it's virtually or in a room, is very, very powerful, and will almost always identify some great opportunities to improve performance, to debottleneck the plant, and again, essentially to optimize the setup. And the powerful thing it does is it brings everybody together, so it gets everybody engaged in that. Now, Roger, I know there's a whole bunch of other things you can do in here. Automation is one of your passions at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Murray. I mean, I absolutely agree. In terms of how you can do this, there are some really good things in terms of behaviors that we'll come on to in a minute, but also automation. So one of the things I've been very interested in recently is learning from how do other industries do this. So for example, in the aviation industry, if you get on a plane, you'll be flying, or the pilot will be flying the plane with a co-pilot there. They have an autopilot. And that's just common practice. We accept it. Yet in the oil industry, the oil and gas industry, we don't have that type of concept yet. I've been working closely with one company that what they're trying to do now is bring in that kind of concept. So it supplements the operators. And what it does, it takes out some of the uncertainties or even the ways of doing things. So it standardizes ways between shifts and how to start up plants in a common way, things like that. It's not replacing the operators, but it's doing things to actually enhance what they do, to actually generate quicker startups and things like that. So there's definitely different things that can be done from an automation perspective. I think the other thing we've been very keen on, Murray, is the behavioral side. So I think a lot of the time we talk about the technical, whether it is focusing on the maximum capacity charge, the production and technical limits, and that's great to get all of that. But really, it's getting into some of the things we really believe in as well, which is the behavioral side of things. So it's not just technical, it's also people. And in terms of that, there's a couple of things that I think are really important that I'll just share. One of them is how you start to get into a barrel chasing culture and some of the key elements. And I know, Murray, you've got a lot of experience on this as well, so I'll let you add to that. Some of the things that I think are important, one of them is getting really clear on the strategic narrative. So for managers and leaders especially, how are you engaging your teams on what the vision is? So for example, in some areas I've worked with teams, and we talk more about this in the vision video, but where they've got a really clear picture of where they're trying to get to, what's the goal? And for example, I've had a picture of a mountain that the teams can all talk to, and at the top of it, it shows 100,000 barrels a day. That's what their target is. That's what they're aiming for. And but there's going to be a bit of a journey along the way, and they describe what needs to stop happening or keep doing, or what do they need to add in to get up there. So the strategic narrative and continuing to talk about that's really important. And then certainly engaging managers, having people who can actually engage with their teams and get the best out of them to motivate them. That's really important. And the third one is, I know close to both myself and Murray's heart, is about engaging people. And if you've got people who have a voice, whether it be the operators or people, the services teams or anybody else, everybody has a voice. If you can get that voice coming forward, you can identify ways of adding barrels, of eliminating those defects that are in there that will potentially shut you down. But it's all about maximizing production. So what I'd say is there are definitely different things you can do technically, but also don't forget the focus on behaviors. So over to Murray, maybe you can elaborate on some of the barrel chasing culture.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. I think, yeah, absolutely. The behaviours are so fundamental. And again, just to highlight, I've seen a few operators over the years that maybe get a little bit too carried away with some of the automation and the digital stuff that's out there. And some of it is fantastic. But yeah, I think we both come from a place, you need the core behaviours right in the first place. I think the good news, I'm a real advocate for the whole loss management side of things, and it may well be a separate video, but you typically find the guys offshore or the guys in the front line, wherever they are, it's really important to them as well.
Yeah.
They sometimes hide it, but actually it usually is very important. There's a real sense of ownership, and a really effective, maximizing production or loss management type approach is a good way to get their engagement and a good way to sort of develop that ownership, because actually they do care. A lot of them care about the performance of the asset, sometimes in a very selfish way, because you just don't want to be going out in poor weather, restarting the plant again. If we can reduce that, that's a good thing. But there's a real sense of ownership there. You've also got some real practicalities, and it's reality in most places. You mentioned startups, Roger, trying to automate some of that. I think there's a reality in a lot of places that different shifts perform differently starting the plant back up. It doesn't mean one's bad. It just, perhaps one is a little bit more experienced. And sometimes that's the downside of really good performance. Again, I've seen this in the past where you get a really good run, the plant's running, we haven't tripped. When you do trip, there can be a little bit of head scratching to get things back up and running again. And that's just reality. But there's things you can do to make that better. And so, if you are seeing differences in different shifts starting the plant back up, which is real, it can be massively frustrating for onshore leadership, but it's a reality. The key is, how do we change that? So again, putting a particular focus on the loss management side of things in how we start the plant back up will unravel a whole bunch of issues in there that we can do something about, because it's something that is fairly easily solved. So yeah, behavior is really important. I think the good news is the guys want the place to perform better. They can see that it's good for them, it's good for their career. And it's, as you mentioned earlier on in this one, Roger, it's just a nicer place to work. If you're part of a high-performing asset that runs well and produces well, it's a good place to be.
Yeah.
So yeah, behaviour is absolutely fundamental.
And I think there's one I'd add in as well is it's about making things visible as well. So we talked about some anecdotes earlier on about making things visible, but that's really key. And what I'd say is, it's not just don't just leave this to once a week or once a month. It's the daily thing. So specifically for the offshore teams, how visible is it to the operations teams? How visible is it to the teams, your daily production, and also setting targets. So it's perfectly okay to, on a day, say, look, this is what the current situation is. This is what your plant's operating like. This is our target for the day. And then actually focus on, well, what are we going to do to achieve that target? And what I like to do is actually just visually graph it out, just put a little chart on a whiteboard or something like that and say, this is exactly where we're trying to get to. Draw your line. That's our target. Now actually see what's going to be the key actions that we're going to take to get there. It's not going to happen by accident. So what are the key things that need to be done today to be successful to achieve that? And then at the end of the day, come back and say, well, what happened? Again, it's a very effective technique, taking it and saying, well, did we achieve all of this? Yes or no? It's not a blame thing, but to learn from it. And what we've found is that the teams that are able to learn from these ways of doing it actually start to understand what's gone wrong, how do they fix it, what can they put in place to make sure it's better tomorrow. And the more you can do that rigorously every day, just check in, this is what we are now, this is our target, this is how we're going to achieve it, checking at the end of the day, this is what actually happened, this is what we learned, how do we learn from that? That makes so much difference. And what it does as well, it motivates people to understand what are they doing on a day by day to contribute towards that target. And what I've seen, like Murray talked about before, the guy who focused on 10 barrels, once we had discussed this is what had happened and other people came forward, it then got locked into the normal way of doing things. It just became one of those added behaviors that people did. So I'd really encourage you to think about, how are you making performance visible on a daily basis? So back to you, Murray.
Yeah, I love that, Roger. And I think absolutely, hitting the nail on the head, doing it regularly, doing it daily, doing it weekly, so it just becomes part of business. Again, I've seen so many times where you've got a target, when you start to look at it towards the tail end of the year, it's too late to do anything about it. If you're slipping away from it, too late. If you're talking about this every day, every week, you can do something. Yeah. I guess maybe my final thought on target, because I've seen it a few times, especially where you've got maybe owners of the organization that are a little bit further afield. So you do all your calculations, you say, right, do you know what, this year we can produce 50,000 barrels a day. We've done all our calculations. and they'll come back and go, fantastic, we're going to add 10% on, your target's 55. It's like, how are we possibly going to achieve that? But you know, every year we did, it always felt like an impossible target, like a huge stretch. But I think people like that challenge as well. And it goes back to your extra 10 barrels a day. Before you know it, you hit that stretch target. So sometimes we can surprise ourselves what's really possible with that stretch. And again, just, yeah, visualizing it, talking about it, communicating it every single day.
Yeah.
So just moving on, observable behaviour. So I guess if we get this right, what should you see and hear and feel around the organisation? One of the obvious things to see, I guess, is something we've hit on multiple times through this presentation, is you should see increased engagement around production. You should see it more visibly around the office and in people's presentations, in discussions. It should be there. And I think it's just keeping that current and valid performance in the, I was going to say public domain, but I guess it's the organizational domain.
Yeah.
Usually this stuff isn't secret. It's maybe not stuff you would share with everybody, but if it's in the office environment and people can see that, I think it just gives you a kind of warm and fuzzy feeling that it's being discussed, it is understood. If it's there, it's relevant, it's up to date, it's a good thing for you to go and see, or that you should be able to see. What you should hear, I guess, linked to that, you should hear people talking about production and talking about performance. Now, that should be happening all the time. But again, I've been in morning calls with assets where you don't have an awful lot of discussion on that. You talk about safety, you talk about logistics, you talk about a whole bunch of other things. But again, we're a production asset. Should be front and foremost in the discussion. And I guess just maybe before I hand back to you, Roger, it's a little bit like, again, I'm coming back to your guy out in the field. There's hopefully more discussion around how to change things, how to maybe challenge ways we work. One that I know you and I spoke about a few days ago was well testing. It's something I've come across many times over the years, where there's a set procedure from the wells teams about how often we put a well into test, how long it's in test, you know, and when it goes back live again. And I've seen that challenge, you know, maybe it's in test for 12 hours. Does it need to be 12 hours? Could it be 11 hours? Could it be 10 hours? Do we need to test it as often as we do? Because it will have changed over the years. You may still come up with the same answer, but it's worth that challenge. So again, what you should hear is more challenge, more suggestions for how we can improve things. That's a good example. If you're hearing more of that, more challenge, more suggestions, a bit more problem solving, people are buying into it. There's a bit of ownership there. There's a bit more engagement.
Yeah. I think the problem solving is a key one as well. What I've noticed is those teams that are really able to problem solve and understand, first of all, what even is the issues, and then frame it up and really rigorously go through problem solving. And there's very simple techniques to do this, but those people who are able to problem solve, they are able to find ways around things that just start to add value, and it's these incremental things that make a big difference. So I've seen that not just in the oil industry but in the steel industry as well. It's problem solving is key, automotive as well, to really just keep moving forward. But ultimately it's about equipping people to be able to problem solve, know how to do it themselves, and then get them working together to do it as a team. So it's not just one person, it's bringing in the different people who are impacted by it to really solve the problem and improve production. Some of the things that I think you'll feel, and so as a leader, I think one of the things that you really feel is confident and reassured that your teams are engaged in this. That's such an important feeling. You know, when I've run assets before, the more you can feel confident in your teams, the better. And this is definitely one way. If they're feeling engaged, they're feeling motivated, they understand how to improve production, they understand the importance of it, it just feels good to you as a leader. It's your teams will feel more proactive about suggesting improvements. So what we're looking for as well is lots of ideas coming forward. So again, that's probably another thing you can look at. How many ideas are coming forward to improve production, you know, to maximize it? If you're not there, then your teams probably aren't engaged in the way you'd like them to be. So what you'll feel as a leader is motivated, but also your teams will feel motivated. So I guess on to activations. We've said that at the end of every video, we'd like to give you a specific activation so you can put into practice something that you've heard from us just through this video. The first activation we'd like you to do is conduct a go, see and assess. So just go, schedule a time in your calendar, go and see actually what's going on. Test those current performance. So how visible are things? Does everybody understand their role in maximising production? How are your unplanned losses communicated, etc.? So those kind of ideas, just go and see and assess it and see for yourself what's going on and what do you reckon, what do you say needs to be improved? The second thing we'd say is go and check your maximum capacity chart. Just look at it. Is it valid? Is it current? As Murray was saying, do we really have the right levels on right now, the right criteria? And are we actually got the right people involved? You know, has it been assessed recently? So is that accurate? So over to Murray just to take us forward from this point.
Okay, thanks for that, Roger. And actually, one of the points you raised in there, I think, you know, again, some of the stuff ought to be obvious and it maybe isn't. When you're looking for suggestions and you're looking for improvements coming forward, and we're saying you should see that, you should hear it and feel it if this is being successful. I think there's also a little bit about making it clear to people they have your permission to do this, because sometimes people have great ideas but don't feel it's their place.
Yeah.
And I've seen this many times, and actually just my very last story of this presentation. One example is from wells on a platform in the southern North Sea. People assume the wells team are the smart ones and they know when to bring wells on and how to do it, and they've got all their procedures for this. We actually had a great suggestion from an operator, one of the techs out in the platform, and he'd come up with a better way of bringing this well on. It was a bit of a troublesome well. And you know, one way of viewing that is no, leave it to the wells team or leave it to the technical engineering teams on shore. They know what they're doing. Actually, this guy had a fairly strange suggestion of how to do it, but you know, everybody got together, we discussed it, and it worked, and it gave us more production. It became the better way of doing things. So it's almost like, you know, you're genuinely looking for people's ideas and suggestions. It sounds obvious, but maybe they don't feel empowered to do that or have that right level of engagement. So I think it's a real good observable behaviour. If that's coming through, you're doing something right.
Yeah.
Just on to that final bit then. So the call to action, as we've said before in all of these, basically go and do it. Go out and do it. Roger's already suggested a few things you can do. Set the time aside, go and have a look at it. We're really interested in how you get on with this. We've seen, you know, plenty of good, plenty of not so good over the years. It's really nice to hear how you're getting on. I think we covered it in one of the first videos. Sometimes driving this stuff, making it happen, leading it can be a slightly lonely, a slightly scary place to be. So again, please don't hesitate. If you want to discuss it and have a chat about it, just get in touch and we'll do that. And that's maybe my final point. We've had some really great feedback in these videos, so thank you for that. If it's the sort of thing you want to share with your colleagues or your peers, again, more than happy to do that. If you would like to discuss any of these topics, not just maximising production, if you'd like to go through that in a bit more detail with some of your specific challenges, again, Roger and I are both happy. We'll set up a session. We'll do this with like a live issue, a live topic with you. So we're actually really interested to hear how you get on. So please share your progress, share your challenges as well. And good luck, and look forward to seeing you in the next video.